Welcome back everyone to the latest episode of my PS1 style devlog. I'm Dank Douglas, and in the last episode of this series, I created code for the player movement, the core mechanics, and the enemies. So if you haven't seen the first video, I recommend watching it first. It's pretty short. Also guys, I really need your help to grow my channel, so please subscribe and like the video because it really helps the video perform well with the algorithm. Back to the game, I wanted to create a small sample area using the PS1 visual techniques to see how well they'd work with the game. For this, I thought why not just start by creating the place that the player will first enter the complex, which would be just kind of a drain or a waste dump for the facility. Firstly, I began by creating a simple level blockout in Unity so I could get a feel for the level from the in-game perspective. After that, I exported it from Unity into Blender to begin refining the layout. All the tricks I used in Blender were learned from YouTuber The Sickly Wizard's video on PSX environments. They showed that one of the most reasonable ways of texturing levels is by dividing it up into chunks, so you can use texture atlasing for the level. I highly recommend that video for anyone wanting to make a PSX style environment. While in Blender, I added in our player model for scale, and then I began by adding in 20 by 20 grids and carved out the shape of the ditches and hills using the knife tool. This type of level chunks are kind of similar to the way the original Silent Hill did the level chunks. I rinsed and repeated with more 20 by 20 grids and used the sculpting workspace to add more shape to the ground until the whole ground was complete. Next, I completed the rock faces that surround the entryway, and I made the walkways and bridges over the gaps to get to the entrance. Even though to you things might look like they went pretty smoothly, it does get way more complicated later in the video. But regardless, please watch to the end because it really helps the channel, and at the very end I go into more detail on some of the roadblocks I've run into, which I need help from any of the more experienced Blender users or game devs that are watching this or are subscribed. But thank you guys. Anyways, back to texturing the thing, I created some seamless textures for the grass and dirt, and some border tiles and dirt variant in GIMP, and then I assembled them for a tile sheet for the ground. With that done, I was able to entirely map all the textures. After doing all of that, I discovered that Blender has a first-person walking navigation mode that I could use to quickly get a feel for how the level would flow in Unity. After doing this a bit, I noticed that the seamless textures looked atrocious because they are way too small and show repeating patterns. It just didn't look natural enough. After that, I decided to move on from the level entirely. Moving forward, I began creating a new level to define the game's look, which would just be indoors and hopefully much less complicated. So firstly, I made another gray box level in Unity, which was way simpler because it only has like 2 rooms and a little bridge area. And I think the indoor setting will be much easier to make look good. After that, I finished the grid version of the new level, thus completing the base, which just needs new textures. Speaking of which, I kinda wanted to make the new textures akin to Metal Gear Solid's textures, which look amazing in low poly. They're so detailed because they had to make up for the gaps that the 3D models couldn't fill on the PS1, due to hardware limitations. For this, I followed an excellent tutorial by YouTuber Little Norwegians on how they made low-res textures on Photoshop. I followed along as best I could, and I made like a reinforced metal wall. After that, I just made a couple more of these textures in like the same style, and I slapped them on the new level to very success, because the flat textures look kind of whack. So to improve the look, I wanted to implement vertex shading, which is also featured in Sickly Wizard's video. Blender has vertex painting tools that can do the trick. Something I noticed is that the chunky grids get kind of shaded roughly with the vertex coloring. So I came up with the idea to subdivide the whole mesh to allow for smoother shading because it would have more vertexes for the, which could have been nice to know when I was making the previous level. However, the big issue I ran into was carrying the big juicy vertex colors into Unity from Blender because they never really seem to show up in Unity, except for when I use like random shaders that Unity comes with, like UI shaders. And even these really messed up the rendering. At one point, I even textured the sky. At this point, I begin to lose grips on reality, because I was frantically searching for a solution for like 6 hours, and I guess I decided to add some fog. It's not much foggier than the contents of my brain. I thought that if I used a PSX like styled shader, it would shake hands with the vertex shading data and actually make it appear. So I found one made by Valerie Moza in the Unity Asset Store, but it never even worked. I did, however, take a liking to the other features of the shader pack, like texture warping, vertex jitter, and the dithering effects. But the shader alone won't complete the design I was looking for, so I still want to learn how to have vertex shading. And if you've made it this far, please consider leaving a comment with ideas I could add, or if you want to send any artwork, 3D models, or sound effects, please use the dedicated email address, dankdouglassubmissions@gmail.com. I think that's it, but if you're a more experienced game dev than me, please let me know if you know how to solve the vertex shading issue, or feel free to share any other advice or tips you have. This is how I set up the Blender shader graph, and yeah. I guess to wrap it up, I want to say thank you so much for all the comments and nice words, and especially all the advice and recommendations with that. Anyways guys, please stay tuned for the next video.